I never thought the sound of footsteps could haunt you long after you've stopped moving, but Deschutes had a way of doing things differently. I remember pulling my old, faded Volkswagen van off the gravel trail just as the sun was bleeding into orange and crimson across the rim of the canyon. The air smelled sharp, almost metallic, mixed with the scent of damp pine needles and the faint, bitter tang of the river below. I'd come to this stretch of the trail because it promised solitude, a chance to hear nothing but the wind and my own breathing. Yet I didn't know solitude could be so alive. I had parked near a small clearing, the ground uneven, roots protruding like gnarled fingers. My friend Casey, younger than me by a couple of years, insisted we'd be fine here. "It's just us and the forest," he'd said, grinning, adjusting his backpack straps. But I could see it in his eyes, an excitement mixed with hesitation. The kind of hesitation I knew too well from nights spent alone in the woods. That whisper of caution you try to ignore, telling you there's something just beyond the edge of what you can see. The first night was deceptively ordinary. We set up our small campfire, the flames dancing and throwing shadows that clawed at the trees, our Volkswagen van just a few yards behind us, doors open, light spilling from the windows. I watched the fire flicker on Casey's face, felt the warmth on my hands, and thought for a moment that nothing could touch us out here. That was before I heard it. The first echo of a step, soft, deliberate, following the rhythm of mine. I froze, listening. My heartbeat seemed to press against my ribcage, loud enough for the forest to hear. I whispered Casey's name, careful trying not to breathe too heavily. He turned to me, puzzled. "What?" he asked. I pointed, but the darkness seemed too thick, swallowing the space between the trees. "Did you hear that?" I said. A laugh escaped him, nervous, but not mocking. "It's just an animal," he said, and I wanted to believe him. I wanted to swallow my unease and let the sound dissolve into the wind, but it didn't. Over the course of the night, the footsteps followed. Not randomly, not with the chaotic pattern of wildlife, but with a deliberate mimicry of mine. Slow when I slowed, faster when I quickened my pace. At first, I convinced myself it was the echo, the way the ground carried sound over the ridges and rocks. But the forest didn't echo like that. Not in the tight corridors between the pines, not with such intent. I started walking with my flashlight, circling the van, pretending to check the perimeter, each sweep of light cutting across empty spaces, yet nothing appeared. Yet the sound continued, unseen, repeating, taunting, right behind me. Casey tried to lighten it, tossing a stick toward the dark, but even that failed. When it hit the forest floor, the footstep paused, then resumed, mimicking me, matching the cadence of my cautious retreat. By 2 a.m., sleep had abandoned us, replaced by a watchfulness that made each small rustle of leaves feel like a warning. We spoke less, listened more, the silence stretching between us until it became its own pressure. The van, normally a safe retreat, felt like a fragile shell, a reminder that even inside it, we were exposed. The next morning, the trail seemed innocent, almost mundane. Sunlight poured through the branches, highlighting dew on the needles, tiny streams trickling down the rocks. But the echo of footsteps lingered in my mind, and I caught myself glancing over my shoulder even as we packed. That day, we followed the ridge, hoping to put distance between ourselves and the clearing, to shake the lingering tension. But the forest has a way of circling back, of wrapping around you until you feel trapped inside it. By the second night, the sense of being followed had become a quiet dread. Not panic, not yet, just a tightening at the base of my spine. We camped closer to the water, the Volkswagen van tucked behind a low rise, headlights off, fire low. I tried to sleep, ear pressed to the thin fabric of the van's interior, listening. And then it happened. The echo changed. It was no longer simply footsteps copying mine. They began to multiply. One, then another, then another. The sound surrounded the van, tracing its edges, circling the tree line. I wanted to call out, to reach through the darkness and demand a name, a presence, anything tangible. But fear pressed against my throat, silencing me. Casey stirred, murmuring something incoherent, and I shook him lightly. He opened his eyes, the white of them stark in the lamplight. "I heard it too," he whispered. The fire flickered, and in that moment, it felt as though the forest leaned closer, listening with us, sharing in the secret of our vulnerability. We sat in tense silence, the echoes shifting closer, nearer, until it felt as though every footstep in the clearing was pressing against the van itself. Morning arrived sluggishly. The forest seemed different, older, somehow, aware of our presence. I examined the ground, trying to rationalize the night's experience. No footprints, only the familiar, jagged roots and fallen pine needles. No evidence of intruders, of animals large enough to make the echoes. Yet I could still hear the rhythm of those steps in my mind, synchronized with my own heartbeat. We decided to hike further, deeper into the trail, hoping distance would dissolve the tension. We passed familiar markers, a moss-covered boulder, the faint rust of a creek rushing beneath the foliage, all ordinary, until the trail curved into a narrow gorge. And then I saw it, a footprint pressed into the soft mud just beyond the trail, eerily human, but wrong. Too long, too narrow, and deep enough to suggest weight, but the shape was distorted. Not quite a man, not quite any animal I recognized. I froze, pointing it out to Casey, who paled. "It's just, maybe someone camped here recently?" he suggested, voice uncertain. I wanted to believe him, but the footmark was alone. No trail leading away, no signs of packing, nothing. And then I realized the footprint matched the size of mine exactly. Every curve, every indentation. And behind it, in the wet soil, another. Echo. One step behind, following mine, repeating my pattern as if waiting for me to move again. Fear finally broke its slow burn and ignited into something sharper, something that pressed into my chest and knotted my stomach. We moved faster, staying on the main trail, glancing at every shadow, every bend in the rocks, half expecting to see a figure lurking. But nothing appeared. The forest swallowed it all. And yet, every time I paused, the mental echo of footsteps came back, insistent, relentless, as if the woods had memorized my own movements and were mocking them. That night, we didn't make a fire. The van sat dark, headlights off, engines cold. I pressed against the door, listening to the wind sift through the trees, to the occasional snap of a branch. Every small sound felt amplified, each rustle a potential presence. And then, soft but unmistakable, the echo returned. A single step delayed behind me, though I had not moved. I didn't turn. I could feel it circling, pacing me in the darkness, as patient as it was inevitable. I don't know how long we sat like that. Minutes, hours, maybe all night. The tension became a physical thing, pressing down on my shoulders, my chest, seeping into the muscles of my back. When the sun finally broke over the gorge, I allowed myself to move, to breathe. The echo did not vanish immediately. It lingered in my mind, reminding me that some things leave impressions not on the soil, but on the soul. We left the trail the next morning, carefully retracing our steps, eyes scanning the edges of the path for any sign, any clue. There was nothing. Yet even as we drove the Volkswagen van away, engine humming against the chill of the morning, I felt it, a weight pressing against the rearview mirror, a shadow trailing our wheels. And I knew, even now, that the forest had memorized me, had left a part of itself inside me, waiting for the next echo to be heard. The road out of Deschutes felt unreal, like the forest itself had softened its edges just to watch us leave. The Volkswagen's tires crunched against gravel, each vibration through the chassis a small reminder that we were moving. Yet the echo of those steps lingered in my mind, threaded into every turn of the wheels. Casey tried to talk, filling the silence with memories of past trips, the mundane chatter of friends on a road that should have been ordinary, but even his voice felt fragile against the weight of the night. We stopped briefly at a small overlook, the river below sparkling in the sunlight, the kind of beauty that makes you forget the darkness, almost. I climbed out, stretching my legs, feeling the cold wind bite at my face. And then I noticed something in the dirt near the edge of the drop-off. A footprint. Not just any footprint, but one pressed into the soil as if someone or something had been waiting for us, tracing our path even here. It was smaller this time, delicate, almost childlike in shape, but unmistakably human. And behind it, the echo, one step behind, matching mine. I froze, my hands clenched the rail, knuckles white, heart hammering. Casey came up beside me, noticing my stare. "It's probably just an animal, right?" he said, my voice strained. But the imprint was too precise, the spacing deliberate, and the way it echoed mine, too intentional, too aware. There's a kind of fear that doesn't scream. It doesn't make noise. It settles into your chest and your bones, a whisper that says, "You're not alone, even when you think you are." We left immediately, moving faster, not daring to stop until the forest had receded from view. But even with miles of road between us and the clearing, I couldn't shake the feeling. The echo of footsteps lingered in every quiet moment. The creak of the van's suspension over uneven asphalt, the brush of leaves along roadside trees, even the simple tap of my own shoes when I stepped outside to stretch at a gas station. Every sound became a shadow, every movement an invitation to something unseen following, learning, repeating. That night, we camped at a roadside pullout, the van nestled between other vehicles, the kind of place where strangers pass and rarely notice you. I should have felt safe. I should have slept. But even with the hum of passing trucks, I could hear it again. Soft. Behind me. Matching my pace. Casey stirred beside me, murmuring in his sleep, but I didn't dare wake him. The weight of the footsteps pressed down, and I realized the fear wasn't just of being chased. It was the realization that something had mirrored me, had understood me in a way that left no room for escape. Morning didn't bring relief. Instead, it brought questions I had no answers for. I examined the van, ran my hands over the tires, the wheel wells, searching for tracks, scratches, anything. Nothing. The forest seemed to have released us, but the impression remained. It wasn't over. It wasn't ever over. And that's when I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to admit during the trip. The echo isn't just a sound, it's a memory. It's the forest marking you, teaching you a lesson about attentiveness, respect, and the quiet knowledge that solitude in these places is never absolute. We tried to push on, heading toward the next stretch of road, but every time I slowed the van at a curve or for a scenic turn, I heard it again. Not outside this time, not in the soil or the leaves, but inside my mind. Footsteps falling in time with mine, even when I was standing still. And in that moment, panic finally broke free. I realized the echo had moved beyond the forest, beyond the clearing, following me into the spaces I thought were safe. Casey noticed my tension. "You're not okay," he said carefully. I wanted to explain, but how could I? How could I describe something that wasn't tangible, something that lived in the quiet spaces between sound and thought? Instead, I nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes, and we drove. Every mile stretched into hours, hiked the sun dipping low, painting the horizon with colors that should have comforted, yet only heightened the awareness that we were still being followed. By the time we reached the outskirts of a small town, the anxiety had transformed into something more tangible. Shadows pressed against the van's windows as we parked near a diner, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I stepped out to stretch, looked back at the empty road behind us, half expecting to see a figure or footprints, but there was nothing. Yet the echo persisted in my mind, patient, lingering. It had learned me, mirrored me, and in doing so had left a trace that I could not discard. We ate in silence, the normalcy of hot coffee and eggs strangely foreign after the tension of the past 2 days. People moved around us, oblivious, laughing, arguing quietly with themselves, yet I felt the echo in every footstep, every movement. By now, it wasn't fear in the traditional sense. It was awareness. It was knowing that even when you leave the trail, the lessons of the forest remain, and the forest leaves behind more than memories. It leaves a pattern, a reminder that the earth, the trees, the wind, and the soil have their own consciousness, patient and unyielding. That night, we camped at a state park with other vehicles nearby, trying to blend into the crowd, to let the presence of others act as a shield. I lay in the van, staring at the ceiling, counting the spaces between the wooden beams, the way shadows stretched over the interior, and I felt it again. The echo wasn't outside this time. It was inside. Each footstep in my mind pressed against the floorboards of the van, a constant rhythm that refused to let me sleep. Casey eventually drifted off beside me, but I stayed awake, listening, feeling, learning. It was in that sleepless night that I understood the lesson of the Echo Trail, not just in Deschutes, but for every time I had wandered into the wilderness, chasing solitude, freedom, or adventure. The Echo is a teacher. It teaches you to be aware, to honor the spaces you enter, to recognize that the world is alive with histories, presences, and attention beyond your own. The fear is real, but is not meant to harm. It is meant to illuminate, to remind you that every step leaves an imprint, that every movement is observed, mirrored, remembered. When morning came, the sunlight streaming through the van's windshield was softer, gentler. I looked over at Casey, still asleep, and realized we had survived. We had left the forest, but we carried a part of it inside us. The echo of steps that repeated after ours, a rhythm that would follow me long after the trip ended. I knew that the next time I returned to Deschutes, or any trail, or any clearing alone, I would walk differently. Not cautiously, not in fear, but with awareness, with respect, with the quiet knowledge that the forest listens, mirrors, and waits. Even now, weeks later, the echo returns in quiet moments. I hear it in the rhythm of my own steps, in the tap of my shoes across pavement, in the soft creak of the van's floorboards. It's a reminder that solitude is never truly solitary, that fear is a guide, and that the woods, the trails, and the echoes within them are teachers, patient and relentless. And sometimes, just sometimes, you have to listen. By the time we returned home, the rhythm of the echo had shifted from terror to something quieter, more insistent. It was no longer just fear pressing against my chest. It had become awareness, a reminder in the spaces between thought and movement. I tried to go about my life as usual, work, errands, the noise of the city, but the footsteps followed in subtle ways. The tap of my shoes on the sidewalk, the creak of the floorboards at night, the soft hum of my Volkswagen van's engine, they all carried the cadence, the memory of Deschutes. Weeks later, I found myself restless. The memory of the Echo Trail gnawed at me, refusing to be quieted. I realized that I wasn't just haunted by the forest. I was haunted by the part of myself I had left there. The fear, the hyper-awareness, the hesitation and hesitation again. It had marked me. And I understood finally that the echo was not punishment, nor mere trickery of the mind. It was guidance. It was a lesson in listening, in moving through the world with attentiveness, humility, and respect. Casey and I planned another trip, this time to a different stretch of Oregon's wilderness. We didn't speak much about Deschutes. We didn't need to. The echo had already rewritten the way we approached every path, every clearing, every darkened stretch of trail. We drove the Volkswagen in silence for hours, the wind slicing through the open windows, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Every bend in the road, every curve in the trees felt alive, aware, and I felt my heartbeat in tandem with it. That night, we set up camp by a small lake, the water smooth as glass, reflecting the stars like a million tiny eyes. There were no footsteps behind us this time, no hidden rhythm echoing ours. And yet, I could feel it, subtle inside me, the echo that had followed me out of Deschutes, shaping the way I noticed the rustle of leaves, the shiver of air across my skin, the quiet signals of life all around. I understood then that the forest does not demand fear. It demands attention. It asks you to notice, to feel, to inhabit the moment fully, to honor the paths you take. As I lay in the Volkswagen van that night, listening to the soft lapping of water against the shore, I realized that the echo was not a curse, but a companion. It followed not to harm, but to teach, to guide, to remind. It had mirrored my movements not out of malice, but to show me that even in isolation, you are never truly separate from the world around you. Every step is a conversation, every pause a listening. And for the first time, I felt the rhythm not as a shadow, but as a pulse, syncing with my own heartbeat. Steady, alive, grounding. When we returned home from that trip, the lessons of Deschutes stayed with me. I began to walk differently, not faster, not slower, but with intention. In the city, in the wilderness, even in the quiet corners of my own home, I noticed the subtleties, the echoes of presence that most people overlook. The whisper of a branch against a window, the distant thrum of tires on pavement, the soft tap of my own shoes against the floor. They were reminders that the world listens, mirrors, and remembers. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I hear it again. Not outside, not in the forest, but inside my own mind. A single, delayed step, matching mine. And I smile because I know that I am alive. I am awake. I am seen. I have learned to honor the echo, to move in harmony with it, to understand that fear is not always to be escaped. It is to be observed, felt, respected, and ultimately transformed. The echo trail of Deschutes changed me, not with violence, not with terror, but with patient, relentless teaching, taught me to listen, to notice, to inhabit every moment fully, and to understand that the world, forests, rivers, trails, even the quiet stretches of road at night, is alive in ways we rarely comprehend. I drive the Volkswagen now with a new reverence. Every journey a meditation, every trail a conversation. And when I hear that subtle rhythm echoing behind me, I do not panic. I do not flee. I step in time with it, knowing that I am part of something larger, something patient, something eternal. There is a fear in the world, yes, but there is also a grace. There is a lesson hidden in the echoes. And if you are brave enough to listen, to feel, to honor it, you will find that even the quietest, darkest trails can lead you home, changed, aware, and alive in ways you never expected. The footsteps still follow me sometimes, late at night, in the rustle of leaves outside the window, in the quiet thrum of tires on a back road. But I am no longer afraid. I have learned to move in step with them, to respect their rhythm, and in doing so, I have learned to move through the world with open eyes, open heart, and the steady pulse of awareness that only a trail like Deschutes can teach. We never truly escape the places that shape us, the paths that mark us. But we can carry them forward not as fear, but as wisdom, as guidance, as the echo of steps that repeated after ours, reminding us to listen, to notice, and to live fully, aware, and awake. I never thought the sound of footsteps could haunt you long after you'd stopped moving, but Deschutes had a way of doing things differently. I remember pulling my old faded Volkswagen van off the gravel trail just as the sun was bleeding orange and crimson across the rim of the canyon. The air smelled sharp, almost metallic, mixed with the scent of damp pine needles and the faint, bitter tang of the river below. I'd come to this stretch of the trail because it promised solitude, a chance to hear nothing but the wind and my own breathing, yet I didn't know solitude could feel so alive. I parked near a small clearing, the ground uneven, roots protruding like gnarled fingers. My friend Casey, younger than me by a couple of years, insisted we'd be fine here. "It's just us in the forest," he said, grinning as he adjusted his backpack straps. But I could see it in his eyes, an excitement mixed with hesitation. The kind of hesitation I knew too well from nights spent alone in the woods. That whisper of caution you try to ignore, telling you there's something just beyond the edge of what you can see. The first night was deceptively ordinary. We set up our small campfire, flames dancing, shadows clawing at the trees, our Volkswagen van just a few yards behind us, doors open, light spilling from the windows. I watched the fire flicker on Casey's face, felt the warmth on my hands, and let myself believe for a moment that nothing could touch us out here. That was before I heard it, the first echo of a step, soft and deliberate, following the rhythm of mine. I froze, listening. My heartbeat pressed against my ribcage loud enough for the forest to hear. I whispered Casey's name carefully, barely breathing. He turned. "What?" he asked. I pointed, but the darkness was too thick, swallowing the space between the trees. "Did you hear that?" I said. He laughed, nervous but not mocking. "It's just an animal," he said, and I wanted to believe him. I wanted to swallow my unease and let the sound dissolve into the wind, but it didn't. All night the footsteps followed. Not randomly, not with the chaotic pattern of wildlife, but with the deliberate mimicry of mine. Slow when I slowed, faster when I quickened my pace. At first, I tried convincing myself it was an echo, the way sound carried over ridges and rocks. But the forest didn't echo like that. Not in tight corridors between pines, not with such intent. I walked with my flashlight, circling the van, pretending to check the perimeter. Each sweep of light cut across empty space, yet nothing appeared. And still the sound repeated, unseen, taunting, right behind me. Casey tried to lighten the mood, tossing a stick into the dark, but even that backfired. When it hit the forest floor, the footsteps paused, then resumed, matching the cadence of my cautious retreat. By 2 a.m., sleep had abandoned us, replaced by a watchfulness that made every rustle of leaves feel like a warning. We spoke less, listened more, the silence stretching until it became its own weight. The van, usually a safe retreat, felt like a fragile shell, a reminder that even inside it, we were exposed. Morning arrived sluggishly. The forest seemed different, older, as if aware of our presence. I examined the ground, trying to rationalize the night. No footprints, just jagged roots and fallen pine needles. No evidence of intruders or animals large enough to make the sounds. Yet I could still hear the rhythm of those steps in my mind, synchronized with my heartbeat. We decided to hike deeper into the trail, hoping distance would dissolve the tension. We passed familiar markers, a moss-covered boulder, the faint rush of a creek beneath the foliage, ordinary until the trail curved into a narrow gorge. That's when I saw it, a footprint pressed into the soft mud just beyond the trail, human-like, but wrong. Too long, too narrow, too deep, and distorted. Not quite a man, not quite any animal I recognized. I froze and pointed it out to Casey, who paled. "Maybe someone camped here recently," he said, uncertain. I wanted to believe him, but the print was alone. No trail, no other marks, nothing. And then I noticed it matched the size of mine exactly. Every curve, every indentation, and behind it, in the wet soil, another echo. One step behind, repeating my pattern, as if waiting for me to move again. Fear finally ignited, sharp pressing into my chest, knotting my stomach. We hurried along the main trail, glancing at every shadow and bend, half expecting to see a figure lurking. Nothing appeared. The forest swallowed it all. Yet every time I paused, the mental echo returned, insistent, relentless, as if the woods had memorized my movements and were mocking them. That night, we didn't make a fire. The van sat dark, headlights off, engine cold. I pressed against the door, listening to the wind sift through the trees, to the occasional snap of branches, every sound amplified. And then, soft but unmistakable, the echo returned. A single step delayed behind me, though I had not moved. I didn't turn. I felt it circling, pacing me in the darkness, as patient as it was inevitable. I don't know how long we sat like that. Minutes, hours, maybe all night. Tension became a physical weight, pressing into my shoulders, my chest, seeping into my back. When the sun finally rose over the gorge, I allowed myself to breathe. The echo didn't vanish immediately. It lingered, reminding me that some things leave impressions not on soil, but on the soul. We left the trail the next morning, carefully retracing our steps, eyes scanning for any sign. There was nothing. Yet as we drove away, engine humming in the morning chill, I felt it, a weight behind the rearview mirror, a shadow trailing our wheels. I knew even then that the forest had memorized me, had left part of itself inside me, waiting for the next echo. The road out of Deschutes felt unreal, as if the forest had softened its edges just to watch us leave. The Volkswagen's tires crunched gravel, each vibration a reminder that we were moving, yet the echo lingered in my mind, threading through every turn. Casey talked about past trips, filling the silence with mundane chatter, but even his voice felt fragile against the weight of the night. We stopped at a small overlook where the river sparkled in the sunlight. I stepped out, stretching as the cold wind bit my face. Then I saw it, in the dirt near the drop-off. A footprint, smaller this time, delicate, almost childlike, but human, and behind it, the echo. One step behind, matching mine. I froze, gripping the rail, heart hammering. Casey joined me, voice strained. Probably just an animal, right? But the imprint was too precise, the spacing deliberate. A fear that doesn't scream settled into my chest, a whisper saying you're not alone, even when you think you are. We left immediately, not stopping until the forest faded from view. But even miles away, I couldn't shake the feeling. Footsteps echoed in every quiet moment. The creak of the van's suspension, leaves brushing roadside trees, even the tap of my shoes on pavement. Every sound became a shadow, every movement an invitation to something unseen following, learning, repeating. That night, we camped at a roadside pullout between other vehicles, the kind of place where strangers pass without noticing you. I should have felt safe, but even with the hum of trucks, I heard it again. Soft behind me, matching my pace. Casey murmured in his sleep, but I didn't wake him. The footsteps pressed down on me, and I realized the fear wasn't of being chased. It was that something had mirrored me, understood me, left no room for escape. Morning brought no relief, only questions. I inspected the van for tracks or scratches. Nothing. The forest had released us, but the impression remained. It wasn't over. I finally understood what I hadn't admitted. The echo wasn't just a sound. It was a memory. The forest marking me, teaching me about attentiveness, respect, and the truth that solitude is never absolute. Casey and I planned another trip to a different part of Oregon. We didn't talk much about Deschutes. We didn't need to. The echo had rewritten the way we approached every trail. We drove in silence, the wind carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Every curve in the road felt alive, aware, syncing with my heartbeat. That night, we camped beside a still lake, reflecting the stars like tiny eyes. No footsteps followed us. Yet I felt the echo inside me, shaping the way I noticed the rustle of leaves, the shiver of air, the quiet signals of life. I realized the forest does not demand fear. It demands attention. It asks you to notice, to feel, to inhabit the moment. As I lay in the van, listening to the gentle lap of water, I understood that the echo wasn't a curse, but a companion. It mirrored my movements to teach me that even in isolation, you are not separate from the world. Every step is a conversation, every pause a listening. For the first time, I felt the rhythm not as a shadow, but as a pulse syncing with my own. Morning brought gentle sunlight through the windshield. I looked at Casey sleeping and realized we had survived. We had left the forest, but carried a piece of it inside us, the echo of steps repeating after ours. I knew that the next time I returned to any trail, I would walk differently, with awareness, with respect, knowing the forest listens, mirrors, and waits. Even weeks later, the echo returns in quiet moments. I hear it in my steps, in the tap of shoes on pavement, in the creak of floorboards, a reminder that the world listens, mirrors, and remembers. Sometimes you have to listen back. The footsteps still follow me sometimes, in rustling leaves, in the hum of tires on a back road, but I'm no longer afraid. I've learned to move with them, to respect their rhythm, and in doing so to move through the world with open eyes, open heart, and steady awareness, lessons only a trail like Deschutes can teach. We never truly escape the places that shape us, the paths that mark us, but we can carry them forward, not as fear, but as wisdom, as guidance, as the echo of steps repeating after ours, reminding us to listen, to notice, and to live fully, aware and awake. The first time I heard a child laugh where no child should have been, it felt like the forest itself exhaled inside my chest, cold, hollow, and knowing. I tell myself now that I should have turned back right then, should have trusted that instinct that flickered like a dying match inside me. But back then, I was still the kind of ranger who believed that the woods answered to reason. My name isn't important, not anymore, and neither is my age. What matters is that I was old enough to think I knew the mountains and still young enough to believe they cared whether I understood them. I work in a stretch of national forest that folds into itself like a clenched hand, valleys dipping so low they never receive direct sunlight, ridges rising sharp and unforgiving. Locals call the place the Hollowing. Outsiders think it's just another poetic nickname born from Appalachian folklore. But the people who've lived here for generations never say it with romance. They say it like a warning, like a reminder whispered at door frames to stubborn children who wander too far after dusk. Before that night, I'd spent years patrolling the trails, following reports of black bears nudging open food lockers or hikers getting themselves turned around after sunset. But there was a part of the forest I avoided more than others. A valley without any official trailheads, marked only by a faint depression of land and the echo of wind moving in spirals. I used to convince myself I avoided it because it was steep or because it didn't offer any campsites worth inspecting. But the truth lay somewhere quieter, deeper. I avoided it because every time I looked down into that darkness, I felt something look back. On the night everything shifted, I was responding to a report from two campers who claimed to have heard voices, children laughing and a woman calling their names, though they were the only ones in their entire zone. They were embarrassed when they radioed in. I could hear it in their tone, that subtle shame of adults admitting fear they couldn't rationalize. I tried to reassure them with the standard ranger lines. Sound travels strange in the mountains, owls mimic human tones, coyotes make noises that could fool you if the wind is right. All true most days, but the longer they talked, the more they sounded like people trying to believe lies they told themselves. And when I hiked toward their site, my footsteps slowing each time the valley's edge grew closer, I began to think that maybe their voices weren't the only ones in this forest hiding things. By the time I reached them, they had already packed up half their gear. Their faces were pale, like they'd been sitting with a truth they weren't ready to swallow yet. The man kept glancing past my shoulder toward the tree line, insisting he'd heard giggling again around dusk, but couldn't find prints, couldn't find anything. The woman said something that stuck with me. It sounded like they were just waiting for us to answer. Something about that hit a nerve I wasn't aware I'd been guarding. Children waiting for someone to answer. In the middle of an empty stretch of forest. In a place no children had disappeared from. Not recently, anyway. Not officially. I helped them hike back toward the main trail. For a moment, the forest felt still, almost relieved to see them go. I should have taken the relief as a message meant for me too, but pride, or maybe something closer to arrogance, dug in its heels. I decided to patrol the valley myself. A quick sweep, I told myself. Make sure no one was out there messing with campers. That was all. But once the couple was gone and the air settled into a deeper kind of quiet, I became aware of a shift. The temperature dropped, not like a breeze, but like a breath had been drawn upward from the soil, chilling everything around me. My flashlight beam caught tiny particles floating in the air. Dust, maybe, or pollen. But the way they moved made no sense. They drifted upward in slow spirals like reverse snowfall. There were old stories about the hollowing, told by the oldest locals at the diner in town, stories about caves sealed by landslides and tunnels carved by something older than the trees themselves. Back then, I'd laugh them off politely, chalking them up to people who needed mystery in their lives. But as I descended into the valley that night, every story I'd ignored felt like it had been waiting in the dark for me to come back. Halfway down the slope, I stopped. I wasn't sure why at first. I just felt halted, like someone had placed a hand on my sternum and held me still. Then I heard it, a single sharp crack of twigs, then another, followed by the sound of weight shifting on the forest floor. Not light, not nimble, heavy, deliberate, something walking parallel to me on the opposite side of the valley wall. I raised my flashlight, not because I expected to see anything, but because that's what rangers do. You face the dark, even if your spine tells you to run. The beam hit nothing but trunks and brush, yet the footsteps kept pace with mine, matching each stride as though it was studying my rhythm. I tried to rationalize it. A deer, a bear, maybe a lost elk. But elk didn't come down this far anymore. Deer moved lighter than this, and bears didn't mimic footsteps so precisely. I forced myself to keep walking until the valley floor evened out beneath me. The silence returned, thick and absolute. My breath sounded too loud, too exposed. I remember thinking that the trees were standing too straight, too still, as if they were holding in a secret. Then, from somewhere deeper in the valley, I heard it. A child's laugh. Small, bright, innocent, completely wrong. It wasn't carried by the wind or distorted by distance. It was close, too close. A sound that should have warmed the heart felt instead like a cold hook dragging through my ribs. I froze. Every part of my mind, every rational bone in my body told me to call it in, to step back, to leave. But another part of me, a quieter, more stubborn part, whispered that maybe someone needed help, that maybe a real child was down there, lost or hurt. Denial can be a powerful thing, especially for rangers. We're trained to be protectors, to step in when others are afraid. But I would learn that the forest knows this about us, and sometimes it uses that against us. I moved forward, slowly, keeping my ears tuned. I didn't hear the footsteps anymore. Only the occasional drip of dew from the canopy, the faint crunch of leaves beneath my boots, and somewhere in the distance, a soft murmur. A child again. Not laughing this time, humming. A low, monotone hum, repetitive, almost mechanical, the kind of sound a child makes when rocking themselves back and forth, lost in their own world. My throat tightened. For the first time in years of service, I felt the unmistakable pinch of fear, not the sudden spike, but the slow, suffocating kind that starts deep in the lungs and crawls upward, filling the chest, then the mind. The humming stopped. Everything stopped. Then a second voice, another child, whispered a single word, "Come." The word didn't echo. It didn't drift. It landed, flat and deliberate, like it had been placed directly beside my ear. I spun so fast my boots slipped in the leaf litter, my hand tightening reflexively on the flashlight until the grooves bit into my skin. The beam cut through the dark, slicing through branches, brush, and empty air. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. I held my ground, forcing myself to listen. My training whispered that panic makes ghosts, that the mind will twist shadows into shapes and wind into voices. The silence that followed wasn't the natural kind born from caution or stillness. It felt held, suspended, as though something unseen waited for me to take the next step. The valley floor had narrowed without my realizing it, funneling me toward a corridor of trees that bent inward at strange angles. Their trunks weren't broken or curled by weather. They were leaning, converging, forming a kind of passage. It looked almost intentional, as if shaped by a force with patience rather than violence. A shiver worked down my arms. I should have radioed for backup. I should have marked my location and retreated. But the whisper still hovered in the air, faint but lingering, and the thought of leaving a child, real or imagined, alone in this place, gnawed at something deep inside me. I stepped forward. The forest swallowed the sound of my movement. Usually, even at night, you can hear the world shift around you. The scuttle of insects, the stretch of branches under their own weight, the wind brushing past bark. But in that narrow corridor, everything grew unnaturally muted. My own breathing became the loudest thing. Each inhale felt like a trespass. Each exhale felt stolen by the dark. Halfway through the natural tunnel, the air changed. It thickened, humid and cold at the same time, like walking through a low-hanging cloud. My skin prickled beneath my ranger jacket. A faint, sickly sweet odor rose from the soil, something medicinal, almost antiseptic, laced with the earthy scent of decay. That's when I knew I wasn't following a child. Something was leading me. The corridor ended abruptly at a clearing I had never seen on any map. Moonlight spilled in through a break in the canopy, but instead of illuminating the place, it seemed to dim as it touched the ground. The clearing was shallow, bowl-shaped, ringed with stones so old they were half swallowed by the earth. And in the center was an opening, a cave mouth, narrow, jagged, breathing cold air that rolled across the ground like fog. My heart gave one solid thump, a warning. I ignored it. I should have stopped. I should have marked the cave's position and waited until morning. But my instincts weren't firing in their normal patterns. My fear had shifted, reshaped itself. It wasn't pushing me to run anymore. It was pulling me to look deeper, to confirm something I didn't want to believe. At the mouth of the cave, something caught my eye, a small fabric scrap snagged on a stone. I crouched, hesitating before touching it. The cloth was faded but patterned like the sleeve of a child's shirt. A design of tiny printed stars, the kind sold in department stores decades ago. But the fabric wasn't old. It was new enough that I could still smell detergent on it. A sound rose from the cave, a soft, rhythmic tapping, not random, patterned. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks again. My skin crawled. Rangers hear knocking sounds all the time in caves, dripping water hitting rocks, loose stones shifting. But this wasn't that. It was too deliberate, too evenly spaced, like someone was knocking from deep inside the earth. I shone my flashlight into the cave, revealing nothing but a narrow throat of stone descending sharply downward. The walls pulsed with moisture. It felt less like looking into a natural cavern and more like staring into the esophagus of something ancient. Then came the laughter. Light, playful, close, too close. It echoed from within the cave, but also around me, above me, threaded through the trees like a ribbon of sound impossible to pin down. The laughter overlapped 2, maybe 3 voices. Children, young, breathless with excitement. But there were no records of missing children in this region, no abandoned campsites, no open cases even remotely tied to this valley. Logic told me none of this made sense. Fear told me logic didn't matter anymore. Another whisper seeped from below, longer this time, drawn out. A single note stretched like taffy until it broke into something resembling a word. Down. My throat tightened. Every instinct I'd suppressed roared to life, telling me to turn, to run, to put distance between myself and that cave. But at the same time, an unsettling numbness washed through me, as if something cold pressed against the back of my skull, stilling the panic that should have consumed me. I stepped closer. The beam of my flashlight flickered, the battery suddenly struggling. The temperature dropped another degree. I could see my breath now, rising in slow, shaky clouds. The tapping stopped. The laughter cut off mid-breath, and something exhaled from deep within the cave. It was long and low, not a growl, not a sigh. A sound like someone drawing a slow breath through lips that barely parted. It dragged across the stone, reshaping the air around me until every hair on my arms stood up. I backed away 1 step, and something moved in the darkness of the cave. My light caught it for only a fraction of a second. 2 small reflections, like eyes barely catching the beam. They were too close to the ground to belong to anything large, too still to belong to anything alive. I blinked, and the reflections vanished. I staggered back another step. My mind scrambled, caught between 2 possibilities: hallucination or threat. Both were dangerous. Both demanded caution. But before I could make a choice, the forest behind me shifted. Something stepped into the clearing from the corridor of leaning trees. Heavy. Slow. A weight that sank into the ground with every step. I turned, raising the flashlight, but the weak beam barely penetrated the dark. I caught only glimpses. Outlines of a broad silhouette, fur clinging to long limbs, shoulders too wide, neck too short, posture too upright to be anything I dared name aloud. My breath stalled in my throat. I'd heard the stories, of course. Rangers always hear them. Tales whispered by hunters who swore they saw a figure darting between pines. Legends passed down by families who lived in these mountains for generations, of something watching from ridgelines. Something ancient that moved like a shadow but weighed like a storm. Most scoff at the stories. But every ranger knows one truth. Legends don't need to be real to be dangerous. Belief alone can warp a place, carve strange grooves into the land and into the minds of those who walk it. The shape stepped forward, and behind it the laughter returned. Not in the cave this time, above it, around it, within it. Like the creature carried the voices with it, bound to its movement, as if they clung to its fur or lived inside its ribs. My pulse hammered. The creature took another step, its outline clearer now. Tall, massive, upright. Its breath misted in the cold air, rising in heavy puffs. I could hear the strain of its lungs, the wet drag of breath that didn't belong to any animal I knew. Then it spoke. Not words, not language, something between a groan and a broken attempt at forming a sound, a syllable caught in a throat too deep for speech. But the children's voices answered it. A harmony of giggles and whispers spilled across the clearing. My vision tunneled. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind. That instinct, long neglected, long dismissed, finally snapped free. Run. I backed away slowly at first, careful not to trigger whatever instinct might drive the creature forward. My boots crunched against the stones. My hand fumbled for the radio. The creature took one last step. The children's laughter swelled, not joyful, but excited. Predatory. My radio hissed to life in my trembling hand, and the thing turned its head toward the sound. Its eyes reflected the faintest sliver of moonlight. Not red, not glowing, but human. That single detail, so small, so impossibly wrong in the mass of fur and shadow, rooted me in place. Everything else about the creature belonged to the wilderness, to myth, to fear. But those eyes, they were the eyes of someone who understood what pain was, what hunger was, what loneliness felt like when stretched past the breaking point. I didn't have long to process the impossible. The children's voices swelled again, rising in pitch, swirling around the creature's head like a chaotic halo. A chorus with no bodies, a crowd with no footprints. The creature inhaled a deep and rattling breath that pulled the cold air toward it. The forest around us responded, branches bending slightly inward, as if the entire valley leaned closer to listen. My fingers tightened around the radio. I pressed the transmit button, but my voice cracked into a whisper, barely recognizable even to myself. Ranger 12 requesting. Before I finished, every piece of equipment on me shuddered. The radio cut into static so violent it vibrated in my palm. My flashlight flickered again, once, then twice, then went dead entirely, plunging the clearing into a darkness so complete it felt physical. The children's laughter stopped. The creature didn't move, not forward, not back, just stared. It was waiting for something. For me? For a signal? For permission? My breath came shallow, uneven. I tried to step backward, but the ground seemed to cling to my boots, as if the earth itself wanted to keep me in place. For a moment that stretched thin as wire, I was trapped between the suffocating dark of the cave behind me and the towering silhouette ahead. Then the creature turned. Not toward me, but toward the cave. It leaned slightly, like a bear sniffing at the mouth of a den. Another breath rattled out of its chest. Gravel shifted beneath its weight. And from deep inside the cave, something responded. Not laughter, not humming, not knocking. A sound like bones grinding against stone. The creature stiffened. Its shoulders hunched upward. Its head tilted in a jerking, unnatural motion, as if reacting to a sound only it could fully hear. I felt a pulse of pressure ripple through the clearing, subtle like the air briefly thickened. Then the children's voices returned. But this time, they weren't coming from the cave. They were coming from the trees. Dozens of tiny voices chanting something I couldn't understand, overlapping and circling, weaving in and out of one another in a rising, frantic rhythm. It felt less like communication and more like urging, calling, driving. The creature bellowed, a guttural, furious cry that shook leaves loose from the branches overhead. It swung its massive arm toward the cave, claws scraping stone as if trying to block the entrance, to seal it, to keep something inside. My blood ran cold. Whatever lived in that cave, the creature feared it. And yet the children's voices were urging it toward that fear. My instincts roared, "Move. Now." I didn't run. Not yet. Panic could kill me faster if I couldn't see where I was stepping. Instead, I began inching backward, keeping my breath shallow, trying not to draw attention. But the moment my boots brushed against the stone ring behind me, the children's laughter shifted. It dropped in tone, it slowed, and the laughter became something else, something jagged, rough, distorted. They were no longer laughing. They were mimicking me, breathing in the same shallow, shaking rhythm I was. My chest seized. The creature snapped its head toward me with terrifying speed. Its eyes reflected a shape of panic I didn't expect, recognition mixed with warning. It lifted its arm, not to attack, but to gesture. Away. Go. Run. But the forest had already shifted its intentions. A wave of cold swept across the clearing, rushing outward from the cave entrance like a silent explosion. My legs buckled, my vision blurred at the edges. The smell of antiseptic and rot intensified, thick enough to taste. The grinding from within grew louder, closer. The creature bellowed again and planted itself between me and the cave. Its muscles coiled, ready to confront whatever pressed from below. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and ran. The forest did not welcome my escape. The moment my boots hit the corridor of leaning trees, branches snapped overhead. Something large crashed through the underbrush parallel to my sprint, keeping pace. Not the creature. I was too familiar now with its heavier, more deliberate rhythm. This was something faster, angry, desperate. The children's voices chased me, weaving through the trees, no longer playful. They screamed, not words, but raw, piercing shrieks that drilled into my skull. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision. Shapes darted between trunks with impossible speed. My breath came in ragged gasps, burning my throat, ripping holes in the cold. Keep moving, I choked to myself, each word a command. But the forest didn't want that. Roots rose beneath my feet, snaring at my boots. Branches whipped across my face. A tangle of thorns caught my jacket, ripping a clean, violent tear along the sleeve. I didn't feel the sting. I only felt the eyes. Multiple. Watching. Tracking. Waiting for me to trip. Halfway up the slope, I heard a roar, deep, furious, echoing from the clearing behind me. The ground trembled. A second roar followed, but it wasn't the creature's. It was something else. Something from inside the cave. The children's voices screamed louder. My panic exploded into something primal. I scrambled up the incline on hands and knees, clawing at roots, dragging myself upward as the forest folded into chaos below. I didn't dare look back. My only goal was to reach the ridge, to reach open air, open space, anything that wasn't the suffocating press of the valley. I burst through the line of leaning trees, stumbled onto level ground, and collapsed beside a fallen log. My chest heaved, my lungs burned. The world spun in sharp, dizzying arcs, but I kept listening. I had to. Behind me, the screams and roars collided, echoing through the valley in a violent rhythm. Something massive crashed through brush. Something else hit it. Rocks tumbled. Branches snapped like bones. Then, silence. Heavy. Total. Absolute. Not the silence of a forest resting. The silence of a forest holding its breath. I didn't move for a long time. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe fully until the first small noises of the night returned. The chirp of a lone cricket. The rustle of wind threading through needles. Only then did I stand. Only then did I realize I wasn't alone. A shape crouched near a distant pine, just at the edge of the ridge trail. Small, child-sized, its back turned to me, its shoulders rising and falling in a slow, deliberate rhythm, rocking, humming, the same monotone hum I had heard in the valley. My vision blurred with terror. I blinked hard, and for a moment the figure flickered like heat distortion over asphalt. When it settled again, it was facing me, but it had no face, just smooth, pale skin where features should have been. And from the blank surface came the children's laughter, hundreds of voices pouring from a mouth that didn't exist. My knees weakened. The figure tilted its head as though studying me. Then it whispered, not with sound, but directly in the space between my thoughts. "You heard us." I staggered backward. My boot caught on a stone. I nearly fell. The faceless figure didn't move toward me. It simply raised one hand, tiny, pale, and curled its fingers inward in a beckoning gesture. "Come." Something behind it shifted, two glowing reflections emerging from the dark tree line. The creature. Bleeding. Staggering. But alive. Its human eyes fixed on me again. This time, the message was clear. Run. That was all I needed. My body moved before thought could catch up. I lunged backward onto the trail, boots scrambling for purchase on loose soil. The faceless child, whatever it was, did not chase me. It simply stood there, hands still raised, the gesture of invitation curling into something far more sinister as I fled. The creature behind it staggered closer to the tree line, but not toward me. It leaned heavily on a trunk, its massive shoulders heaving with ragged breaths. Dark fluid, blood, or something like it, dripped from its fur. In the weak moonlight, I saw deep gouges along its torso, as though something inside that cave had torn into it with purpose. But even wounded, even shaking, the creature kept its gaze on me, its human eyes filled not with rage, but with a warning so clear, so desperate, that every instinct in me sharpened to a single point of certainty. You don't belong here anymore. I turned and ran. The trail blurred beneath my feet, illuminated only by faint moonlight filtering between branches. My dead flashlight swung useless at my side. The forest shifted around me in strange ways, as if the trees leaned closer, narrowing the path with each step. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, darting behind trunks, always keeping pace but never revealing themselves fully. Behind me, the children's voices rose again, hundreds of overlapping tones, some laughing, some weeping, some shrieking in animalistic bursts that scraped against my spine. They followed me like a windstorm, pushing the air ahead of them, bending it, distorting it. At one point, a voice, one that sounded older, strained, almost maternal, whispered directly at the base of my skull, "Stay." I nearly tripped. My pulse slammed so hard I felt it in my teeth. Then another voice, small, trembling, mimicked the same word. "Stay." A third. A fourth. They built a chorus of pleading, begging, coiling around my mind like fingers. "Stay, stay, stay, stay." "No," I whispered, breath ragged. "Not tonight. Not tonight." I forced my legs to move faster. I reached the ridge trail, a narrow path that cut along the mountainside like a knife. The valley plunged into darkness to my left. To my right, the slope climbed into thick brush and jagged rock formations. The air felt marginally clearer here, thin but real, no longer clogged with the suffocating pressure of the hollowing. But the voices did not stop. Something crashed through the underbrush directly behind me, heavy footsteps, snapping branches, the wet drag of weight moving uphill. Not the faceless child, not the thing in the cave. The creature. It was following me. At first, terror seized my chest. Then I saw again those eyes, the unmistakable shape of warning in them, the fierce protective rage it had shown when confronting the cave. And against all logic, all instinct, I realized it wasn't hunting me. It was shielding me. Something else in that valley wanted me far more. A sudden crack sounded ahead, sharp, violent. I skidded to a stop. A massive tree had fallen across a section of the ridge trail, splitting it like a barricade. Fresh splinters jutted upward, pale in the moonlight. It hadn't fallen by accident. Something had pushed it over. Somewhere beyond it, the faint sound of humming drifted toward me. Not children this time. Something deeper. Lower. A droning resonance that made my vision quiver. I backed away from the fallen tree. A hand, small, pale, gripped the top of the trunk. My heart seized. Another hand pulled up beside it. Then a head rose. Not the faceless child this time. This one had a face. But it was wrong. Too smooth, too clean, too perfect. Like someone had molded a child's features from wax and pressed them onto a blank canvas. Its eyes blinked with the slow, heavy rhythm of something not used to blinking. Its lips parted in a wide, unsettling smile, revealing teeth that looked more like shards than enamel. "Hello, Ranger," it whispered. My stomach lurched. I stumbled backward, straight into something warm. I froze. Slowly, I turned. The creature towered over me, its body blocking the path behind. Its fur bristled with tension. Blood dripped from a wound near its shoulder. But its posture was defensive, angled between me and the wax-faced child. The child tilted its head. "He heard us." Its voice wavered, glitching between pitches. "He can stay," it added, smiling too wide. The creature bellowed. A roar so deep it vibrated the ground under my boots. It lunged toward the child, swiping with massive claws. The child leapt back, moving with an inhuman jerkiness, limbs bending at angles that made my stomach twist. The two collided with a force that snapped branches like matchsticks. The child shrieked, its voice fracturing into dozens of smaller voices, all crying out in different tones. The creature roared again, pinning it momentarily. "Run," a voice whispered beside me. I flinched, but when I turned, there was no one there. Just the wind, just the forest, or something using them both. I didn't wait. I sprinted up the ridge, lungs burning. The fighting behind me grew louder. Snaps, cracks, guttural sounds that didn't belong to any animals in this world. Then a scream tore through the forest. Not a child's scream. The creature's. A sound full of pain and rage and resignation all at once. I forced myself not to look back. If I did, I wasn't sure I'd survive whatever I saw. Ahead, the trail curved upward toward a ranger access road. If I could reach the gravel, I could follow it back to the outpost. But the mountain wasn't done with me. A shadow darted across the path ahead, small, fast. I veered left, ducking under a low branch, heart pounding. The humming grew louder now, shaking the air like the resonance of something hollow, something ancient, something crawling closer. I burst through a curtain of brush and crashed onto the access road, gravel skidding out from under my boots. For a second, just a second, I felt relief. Then I heard footsteps behind me, multiple sets, soft, light, childlike. I didn't turn around. I bolted down the road, the incline carrying me faster and faster until my lungs screamed and my legs burned. My breath tore through my throat like fire. A gust of cold air swept behind me, pushing forward with unnatural force. The children's voices shrieked, "Don't leave us. Come back. Stay. Stay." I saw the lights of the outpost ahead, dim, flickering orange from the porch lamp. Just 100 more yards. 50. 40. The voices surged, reaching a fever pitch. Then silence. Instant. Complete. I stumbled to a stop on the outpost steps, spinning around, gasping for breath. The road behind me was empty. The tree line was still, no shadows moving, no children, no creature, only the dark mouth of the forest staring back. I collapsed onto the steps, gripping the railing until my knuckles whitened. My body trembled uncontrollably, part fear, part shock, part a dawning realization that whatever lived in that valley had let me go. Or worse, it wasn't finished with me yet. I stayed outside until sunrise, unable to make myself enter the outpost's dark interior. When the sun finally poured gold across the gravel, I allowed myself to breathe, really breathe, for the first time since I'd heard that first laugh. But even in daylight, the forest beyond the ridge looked wrong. Too quiet, too expectant. I filed no report. I told no one. Some truths don't belong on paper. Days passed, then weeks. The forest resumed its usual rhythm. Wind through pines, ravens cutting across the sky, hikers wandering the ridges unaware of what sleeps below their feet. But I changed. I started dreaming of the valley, of the cave breathing cold air, of the children humming beneath the soil, of the creature's human eyes staring through the dark. Sometimes, when the wind is low and the forest holds its breath, I still hear them, soft, close, behind me, children laughing where no children should ever be. And every time I feel the echo of that final warning rise behind my ribs, the one I didn't understand until it was too late. Reason is fragile, fear is patient, and the darkness under these mountains never forgets. The first hours that day were quiet. The station's furnace groaned as if it resented being awake, and the smell of burnt coffee lingered in the corners. I remember tracing my fingers over the frost patterns on the window and thinking, not for the first time, how the forest looked as though it leaned toward the station, the trees tilting just slightly, as if watching. It was an optical illusion, I told myself. Always rational. That's how I survive. Rational thought. I received the call just past 9, a hiker missing, reporting from the South Trail near the old logging road. His voice was calm, too calm, as if he had rehearsed it. He said his partner had disappeared while checking a frozen creek and that he didn't hear anything, saw nothing, and wasn't sure if he should wait or hike back. I promised to check immediately. Driving through the forest, the sky was a uniform gray pressing on the hood of my truck. My radio crackled with static. I kept catching the sensation that someone or something was moving just beyond the tree line, but each time I slowed, nothing appeared. I arrived at the creek. Snow crunched underfoot, brittle and loud, the sound bouncing off the hollow trunks. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Wet fur burned as if a forest fire had passed hours before, yet the trees were untouched. It made my stomach turn. The creek itself had frozen in peculiar ways. Thick ice with bubbles trapped inside, reflecting distorted images. And then I saw it, the body. Not fully formed, not yet, but enough. Pale, hunched at an unnatural angle, limbs bent the wrong way. Snow clung to it as if holding it there, and beneath the frost, a strange, subtle shimmer. I blinked. It moved slightly, like a reflection in water shifts when the light changes. I told myself it was the wind. But the wind doesn't make fingers twitch. I radioed back, voice steady, calling it in. The dispatcher didn't respond for a while. When she finally did, her tone had changed, clipped. "You sure you're at the right coordinates, Calder?" I repeated them. She hesitated, then asked me to hold. I felt my stomach knot. Professionals never pause like that unless something is wrong. By mid-afternoon, the sun was a flat smear behind the clouds. I returned to my truck for notes, and that was when the whispers started. They were faint at first, like the hiss of melting snow, then clearer. Soft voices, calling from under the ice or maybe under the soil. Words I couldn't understand. Rational thought faltered. I told myself they were echoes, remnants of the rushing creek. I walked back toward the body, just to prove to myself it was real. Only the body was gone. No footprints in the snow, no sign of struggle, just untouched ice. The station was empty when I returned. Empty, and yet heavier, as though it had grown a weight in my absence. The lights flickered. I could have sworn I saw shadows moving across the walls, elongated, bending unnaturally, tilting toward me. I had to breathe slowly to stop my chest from tightening. Rational. Always rational. I checked the perimeter cameras. Nothing. Just empty snow and static in the trees. The next day, I found something worse. A set of footprints. Enormous, leading from the North Ridge to the station itself. They were humanoid in shape, but uneven, shifting in size. I followed them, notebook in hand, documenting, forcing logic over terror. The tracks ended abruptly at the edge of the tree line, leading into a patch where the snow refused to settle, as if the earth itself were boiling under an invisible heat. And beneath that patch, faint scratches in the soil, not claw marks, not human nails, something deeper, something old. Nights became harder. The wind, once friendly in its whistle, turned hostile, carrying smells, burnt hair, iron, a hint of sulfur. The forest seemed to lean closer to the station each evening. The trees' shadows stretched unnaturally across the windows, moving against the angles of the moon. I began hearing footsteps behind me when I walked through the hallways, but the echo never matched my pace. Rational. Stay rational. Sleep came less and less. Dreams mingled with reality, crawling through abandoned mining tunnels, bodies piled and frozen mid-scream, whispers in the walls. I would wake drenched in sweat, hands shaking, only to find the station untouched, orderly, as if my mind had conjured horrors for the sake of punishment. Rational. Every detail logged, rationalized. One morning, I checked the southern trails and found markers, red paint, freshly sprayed on rocks and trees. They weren't official. They formed patterns I couldn't identify, lines converging, spiraling toward the creek. And at the creek, the ice had moved. Not cracked, not thawed, just shifted. Patterns in the frozen water reflected something in me I didn't recognize. My reflection smiled when I didn't. I backed away, but the reflection lingered, watching, grinning. Rational. Rational. By week 2, I was alone in every sense. Radio calls went unanswered. Hikers had vanished. Staff rotated out, citing family emergencies, sickness, fatigue. One by one, the station emptied until only I remained. And the forest, every morning, it leaned closer. The trees themselves bending toward the station as if inspecting a specimen. Sometimes I woke to find branches pressed against the windows, snow melting in unnatural circles where they touched. I tried telling myself it was gravity, snow weight, wind, but the angles didn't match. I began recording everything, smells, sounds, movements. The whispers grew bolder, sometimes in rhythm with my heartbeat, sometimes counter to it. Shadows moved in the ice, the walls, the windows, sometimes mimicking me, sometimes moving independently. Rational. Document. Control. But the line between observation and participation was slipping. The forest wasn't just a background anymore. It was watching, waiting, learning. Then came the smell of decay inside the station. Not subtle, thick, wet, as though the forest had walked in with me. I followed it, notebook clutched, flashlight cutting arcs through the dim light. The source was impossible, walls clean, floor swept, corners empty, and yet the smell lingered. I realized I wasn't alone. I didn't see it, but I felt it, something waiting in corners just outside the edge of my vision, waiting for me to blink. I started hearing voices in the forest calling my name. Not the radio, not any human voice I recognized, just my name over and over. Soft, drawn out, almost affectionate, like a memory I couldn't place. Rational. Ignore it. I told myself it was guilt, grief, imagination, but rational thought felt like a fragile thread. I began answering back in whispers. Sometimes the forest replied, sometimes it didn't. And each day the tilt of the trees seemed more pronounced, their branches pushing closer to the station, their shadows longer, darker, moving independently of the light. I have never told anyone this. I will never tell anyone. Each day here bends reality. Memory is a tool and a trap. Some things are gone for good, some things watch. Some nights I sit in the darkness of the station and listen to the trees tilt themselves toward me, thinking of my brother, of the hikers, of the body that vanished beneath the ice. I tell myself I am rational. I tell myself I will survive. But the forest remembers, and it has long memories. I don't know what comes next. All I know is that the forest leans closer every day. And I am still here. I started noticing the patterns in the snow too. Not tracks, not circles, not anything I could immediately identify. Sometimes they looked like writing, scratched, etched by something beneath the ice. But every time I tried to copy them in my notebook, the shapes shifted, impossible to replicate. I would wake the next morning to find my sketches torn and scattered across the floor, as if the forest had inspected them and deemed them incorrect. Rational, I told myself. Keep observing, keep recording. Logic still functions. But nights were no longer restful. Every creak in the station sounded like footsteps circling the building, sometimes running, sometimes dragging, sometimes stopping entirely, leaving a silence worse than sound. I installed cameras outside, but every playback was corrupted. Lines of static, frames where shadows seemed to twist unnaturally, the darkness folding in on itself. Once, I caught a glimpse of something at the tree line. Humanoid, impossibly tall, limbs angled like broken branches, standing perfectly still despite the wind rattling the pines. When I returned the next day, there was nothing, just snow, flattened as if someone or something had stepped across it and vanished. By the third week, I started doubting my own memory. My routines slipped. I would check the creek at noon only to find it frozen solid in patterns I hadn't seen before, or thawed in strange areas that made no sense. My notes no longer matched what I saw. Items I left on my desk would move overnight, a flashlight here, a notebook there, sometimes stacked atop one another in small, deliberate towers. It wasn't playful. It wasn't accidental. Something was observing, and it was practicing control. I began sleeping less, a few hours at most, curled in the corner of the station with a rifle in hand and a flashlight under my chin. The darkness in the hallways seemed to lean in when I closed my eyes, and I could hear faint whispers behind the walls, in the vents, under the floorboards. They spoke in syllables I didn't recognize, or maybe didn't want to recognize. Sometimes I thought I heard my brother's voice calling from the forest. Rational. That was my brother's voice. Or guilt, playing tricks. That's all. One night I woke to find frost forming inside the station. Not on the windows, not on surfaces, but in midair drifting like slow smoke. The shape coalesced into a humanoid silhouette standing silently at the far end of the hall. It didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. I called out. Nothing. I threw the flashlight at it. The figure dissipated, leaving behind only the smell of burnt fur, wet soil, decay. My chest ached from the sudden tension. Rational, I whispered to myself. Sleep deprivation. Hallucination. It was during this week that the forest started intruding in more direct ways. Branches pressed against the building walls, bending windows, scraping glass. Snow melted in strange patterns along the floors, leaving puddles that reflected figures I hadn't seen standing there. The ceiling groaned as though something massive moved overhead. though I knew the roof could bear far more than my imagination suggested. Every morning, I woke with bruises on my arms and scratches across my legs, though I couldn't recall getting them. Rational. The forest is dangerous. Accidents happen. But something about the timing, symmetry, and precision of the marks suggested intent. I began documenting the whispers, trying to transcribe them phonetically. They sometimes came as questions, sometimes as commands, sometimes as a chant, sometimes just my name repeated over and over. I found myself answering them silently, my mind complicit in the dialogue. Rational. Interaction is necessary to understand patterns. But there were moments when my voice returned echoes I didn't remember speaking, words and sentences unfamiliar to me yet coherent. That's when I realized I wasn't just being watched. I was being taught, trapped in lessons I didn't want. By the fourth week, I could no longer differentiate between reality and hallucination. My reflection in the ice no longer mirrored me correctly. Limbs stretched at impossible angles, my face sometimes smiled without my consent. I saw shadows detaching from trees and moving freely across the snow, sometimes merging with the branches themselves. Whispers came sometimes from my own mouth, sometimes from under the floorboards, sometimes from deep within the forest. Rational thought felt like a fragile thread I clutched, always slipping through my fingers. It was then that I discovered the mine, hidden, old, unmarked on any map. A gaping mouth in the side of a ridge, snow and ice covering the entrance, but not entirely blocking it. I found it while following a set of footprints, enormous and uneven, leading from the ridge toward the creek before vanishing. Rational. Investigate. Record. I strapped on a headlamp, grabbed my notebook, and climbed through the jagged ice, feeling the forest close behind me with every step. Inside the mine, the darkness was immediate. Alive, pressing on my chest, whispering, waiting. The smell was thick, sulfur, decay, burnt hair. Footsteps echoed behind me, though I saw no one. The walls were scratched with symbols, jagged and geometric, some humanoid, some impossible. Some shapes looked like faces frozen mid-scream. Rational. Document. Observe. And yet, as I moved deeper, I heard my brother's voice clearly, calling my name, urging me forward. Rational. Stay rational, don't follow phantoms, but my feet moved anyway. Deeper still, I found remnants of past visitors, clothing, backpacks, bones, some partially preserved in the cool, dry air of the tunnels. Then I saw it, a figure crouched in a corner, face pressed against the wall. At first, I thought it was another hiker. Then it turned. Its head tilted impossibly, its eyes too wide, reflecting my own fear back at me. No mouth moved, yet I heard a whisper. You shouldn't be here. Rational. It's a hallucination. But the smell, the proximity, the weight of its presence, undeniable. I retreated, documenting everything. But as I exited, the mine seemed to shift behind me. Entrances had moved. The snow covering the mouth had melted, revealing new tunnels I hadn't seen before. Branches from the forest leaned closer to the station than ever. Something had marked me. I felt it in the scratches along my arms, the pressure in my chest, the whispers now following me even into the station. The forest, I realized, was not just alive, it was intelligent, ancient, patient, and it had me in its gaze. Rational thought remained my only anchor. I told myself, survive, document, stay awake. Each night, the whispers grew bolder, forming phrases, sentences, commands, subtle threats. Shadows moved independently. Reflections twisted reality. My body trembled, exhausted, yet I documented everything. Rational. Documentation preserves sanity. By week 5, my perception fractured. Days blended into nights. I would find myself in the creek at noon, trying to record ice patterns, only to realize it was 2 a.m. My reflection grinned without my consent. Shadows lunged from the trees in my periphery. The forest leaned with intent, like a predator studying prey. I whispered my brother's name. Rational. Rational. But in the darkness, I understood. Some things appear only when no one is watching. Some things wait for the perfect moment. And some things remember every scream. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't exist in the forest. The station creaks and whispers, and the trees tilt, always tilting, leaning closer each day. I document, I rationalize, I survive. But I know now that survival is not a gift. It is a condition, a temporary lease. The forest is patient, and I am in its debt. It was during one of these mornings that I noticed the first set of marks leading away from the station, embedded in the thick snow and dirt. Handprints, enormous, deeply pressed, trailing in pairs as though some creature had shuffled forward on all fours. The tracks vanished abruptly at the edge of the tree line, only to reappear across the creek, as though the forest had relocated them while I wasn't looking. I followed, notebook trembling in my gloved hands, flashlight cutting swaths of weak light through dense pines. Each step felt heavy, as if the ground beneath me were absorbing my weight unevenly, a subtle vibration that made my chest tighten. I discovered the second mine entrance that day. It wasn't marked on any map, and I could swear it hadn't been there before. A black fissure in the slope, jagged rocks surrounding the mouth, frost shimmering unnaturally along its edges. Rational, investigate, record. I climbed down, the snow crunching behind me, leaving no trace. Inside, the mine was more oppressive than the forest above. The air was thick with moisture and decay, the walls etched with patterns that seemed to shift in the light of my headlamp. I could hear breathing, not mine, not human, but something deliberate, heavy, and close. Deeper in, I stumbled across old camping gear, backpacks, tattered jackets, and bones, some still partially fleshed. They were human, and I recognized the terror they carried, limbs twisted in ways impossible for living creatures, faces frozen mid-scream. Rational. Keep calm. Record everything. My brother, the hikers, the lost park rangers, were they here? Did this forest claim them, or had something else? The mine seemed endless, branching like veins through the mountain, echoing every sound I made. I could feel it listening, shaping the space around me. Then I saw it, a crouched figure pressed against the wall. At first, I thought it was another ranger, perhaps a trespasser, but when it lifted its head, the angle of the neck was impossible, eyes too large, reflecting my own fear back at me. It didn't speak, yet I heard a whisper in the back of my skull, "You shouldn't be here." Rational. Hallucination. My pulse spiked, but I forced myself to step closer, documenting, recording, rationalizing. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, yet the smell, burnt fur, wet earth, and decay hit me full force. My stomach turned. As I retraced my steps to leave, the mine's entrance seemed to shift behind me. Rocks rearranged themselves, the walls closing in slightly, forcing me forward. Snow outside had melted in patches around the station, revealing more footprints that hadn't been there before. Branches now pressed against the windows like fingers, shadows reaching inside, bending light and shape. I realized the forest wasn't just observing, it was experimenting. Testing me, perhaps molding me. Sleep became a fading memory. I sat in corners with the rifle across my knees, flashlight under my chin, listening to whispers that now formed sentences, commands, questions. Sometimes my own voice responded without my consent, sometimes words I didn't know left my mouth. Rational. Don't answer. But I did anyway, whispering back to the darkness, the snow, the trees. Rational. Observe. Survive. Yet the line between interaction and obedience blurred. One night, I woke to frost forming in the hallways, suspended midair. Shapes coalesced into figures that moved against the direction of the ceiling fan, swaying, leaning closer. I threw my flashlight. The shapes vanished, leaving only the smell, wet soil, sulfur decay. My arms were scratched, bruised, though I remembered no struggle. Rational. The forest doesn't need to touch to harm. Presence alone suffices. By week 6, perception fractured entirely. Hours bled into days. I could not tell if I was outside or inside, awake or dreaming. Ice in the creek reflected otherworldly shapes, elongated limbs, distorted faces, sometimes my brother staring back. Shadows detached from trees, moving on their own. The forest leaned in closer every day, learning, remembering. Rational thought clung to me like a splintered branch. My journal filled with observations, diagrams, words I no longer recognized. It was then I heard the singing. Not human, not melodic. Low, guttural, like the forest exhaling. It came from beneath the station, vibrating through the floorboards, through the walls. I found a trapdoor, previously unnoticed, leading to a sealed bunker. Metal doors warped, scratched with symbols similar to those in the mines. Rational. Investigate. My flashlight flickered as I pried the door open. Inside the bunker, the air was hotter, thick with the stench of burnt hair and earth. Shadows pooled in corners, reflecting light in ways that made the walls appear to breathe. I could hear movement, soft, deliberate circling. The whispers had become coherent, narrating things I had done, things I feared, predicting my next steps. Some sentences were mine, spoken aloud, but I had no memory of saying them. I realized then that the forest, the mines, the shadows, they knew me intimately. They had studied me, and they were patient. I moved deeper into the bunker, walls etched with faces frozen mid-scream, symbols twisting in the low light. Something shivered beneath the floorboards, something too large to be human, yet moving with deliberate, intelligent restraint. I documented it anyway. Rational. Observation preserves sanity. But my hands shook, my chest ached. The air pressed on me as if inhaling my rationality. At the end of the corridor, I found a room with a single intact body, sitting upright, back against the wall, head tilted impossibly to the side. My brother. Or a mimic of him. My mind screamed, but rationality whispered, hallucination, memory, guilt, obsession. The smell was unbearable, the silence suffocating. The shadows in the corners stretched further, bending light, bending space. I could feel them leaning in, waiting. I don't know how I escaped. I retraced my steps blindly, the walls seeming to pulse and breathe. Outside, the forest leaned closer than ever. Branches pressed against the station, snow melting where their shadows touched. The whispers followed me into the daylight, calling my name, reminding me of the mine, the bunker, the body. I recorded everything, knowing it might be my only proof. The forest remembers. It waits. Some things only appear when no one is watching. Some things remember every scream. Some things lure you willingly, and some things bend reality until rational thought is a fragile, frayed line. I am here, still, observing, documenting, surviving. The station is quiet now, the forest leaning closer every day, shadows stretching across windows, walls, ice. I write these words as evidence, as confession, as a record for anyone who might come after. I cannot leave. I cannot trust my senses. Rational thought is my only tether, but it is failing. I hear footsteps behind me now, though the station is empty. I see shadows in the ice, reflections grinning back, though I stand still. I smell decay, burnt hair, wet soil, though the building is clean. The forest is patient, and it remembers, and I am still here, and it is still watching. That night, the whispers grew insistent, almost commanding. They carried my brother's voice calling from the tree line, mingling with my own name in a chant-like cadence. I tried to ignore them, but they wrapped around my thoughts, threading doubt and terror into every rational argument. My reflection in the ice no longer matched my movements. It smiled when I didn't. It raised a hand when mine remained at my side, and sometimes it stepped closer than I was capable of moving. Compelled beyond reason, I ventured once more toward the creek. The ice bulged upward, forming ridges that reflected not the sky but twisted visions of the forest itself. Towering shadows that bent at impossible angles, figures crouching, kneeling, crawling across the frozen water. The footprints followed me, enormous and uneven, shifting subtly with every step, guiding me, corralling me. And then I saw it. Something moving beneath the ice, just out of focus, undulating, deliberate. Rational, observe, document, survive. My notebook trembled in my hands. The mind called me again. Its entrance had widened as if breathing, inviting me. Inside, the walls pulsed with low, rhythmic vibrations, and symbols I had previously sketched now shimmered, twisting into new formations. Shadows detached from the walls, sliding along the ceiling, pooling at the corners with deliberate intent. The air smelled of burnt hair, decay, and sulfur, thick and clinging. I descended deeper than I had ever dared, my flashlight slicing arcs of light through blackness that felt almost viscous, resisting my progress. And then I saw the final figure. It sat cross-legged in a chamber at the mine's end, head tilted impossibly, limbs folded at strange angles, the body perfectly still. At first, I thought it was human, but the moment I stepped closer, it raised a hand, Not quickly, not violently, but deliberately, slowly, as though measuring my reaction. Shadows shifted behind it, forming a halo that bent space and light in impossible ways. My rational mind screamed that this was a hallucination, a trick, but the smell of decay and burnt hair confirmed reality. Or something far worse. I felt the whispers inside my skull, circling, pressing, insistent. Sit, watch, join, understand. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet I found myself obeying, lowering myself to the cold stone floor. The figure's head tilted toward me, impossibly, in synchronization with my heartbeat. And then I realized it was not alone. Shadows moved independently in the room, pooling and stretching, mimicking figures I had once seen above, in the ice, in the station. Reflections of horrors I could not name glimmered along walls that seemed alive. I remembered my brother then, or thought I did. Somewhere between memory, guilt, and hallucination, his voice rose above the others. It called my name, beckoning. Rational thought faltered completely. I called back, whispering into the darkness. The figure in front of me shifted its weight, subtly, unnaturally. Shadows converged behind it, forming shapes that resembled the missing hikers and the lost rangers, twisted into forms impossible yet familiar. They leaned in, stretching into the corners, pressing against the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Time ceased to exist. Minutes bled into hours, or perhaps it was days. My notebook lay open, its pages covered with incomprehensible symbols, sketches, observations, all documenting the forest, the mine, the shadows, the whispers. My own words returned to me twisted, unfamiliar, echoing in the room as though written by someone else. The air hummed with intent, vibrating against my bones. Rational thought, survival instinct, memory, they all frayed under the weight of observation, expectation, patience. Finally, I emerged. The forest waited outside the mine, leaning closer than ever, shadows stretching across snow and earth, patterns reflecting memories, horrors, desires. Branches pressed against the station with deliberate force, snow melting beneath their touch, shapes forming faces, hands, eyes. The air carried whispers, my name, my brother's voice, commands and observations interlaced. The tilt of the trees felt conscious, aware, calculating. Rational thought was a fragile thread now, a candle in a storm. I returned to the station, documenting, observing, recording every shadow, every sound, every subtle vibration of the earth. The frost on the windows formed symbols I had not drawn, faces I did not recognize, mirrors to something ancient and deliberate. The whispers now narrated actions I had not yet taken, predicting movements, thoughts, fears. I could not tell where the forest ended and I began. I could not distinguish reflection from reality, hallucination from truth. Rationality clung to me as a last failing tether I cannot leave. The forest has made that clear. Paths I once knew bend back toward the station. Ice forms barriers, snow drifts in unnatural patterns, shadows move in ways that prevent escape. The whispers follow me, inside and outside my head, blending memory, observation, command. I record everything because that is all I can do. Observation preserves me, even as sanity frays, even as the forest leans closer, tilts, watches. I write these words as a warning, though I doubt anyone will read them. Whoever comes after will encounter what I have encountered. The forest remembers, it waits, and it is patient. It bends reality, it studies, it teaches. Some things only appear when unobserved. Some things remember every scream, every step, every whisper. The forest tilts toward the station, and it remembers me. I am Sam Calder. I am still here. I am still observing, still recording, still breathing, though it is not certain whether I belong to myself or to the forest. It waits, and I wait. Shadows stretch, ice reflects, whispers call. The tilt of the trees is deliberate. And anyone who reads this must know, do not trust the forest. Do not follow the tracks. Do not answer the whispers. Some things are patient, some things remember, and some things, once observed, will never let go. I am still here. The forest knows.